Imagine that D-Day was a disaster. The Nazis prevailed and Britain was invaded. Imagine that the entire country is occupied. Imagine that that occupation even came here, to the Olchen, an isolated sheep farming valley in the Black Mountains. That is the starting point of my novel, Resistance. I always knew that I wanted to write something that was set here, in these beautiful valleys of the Black Mountains, near where I was brought up. What I wasn't expecting, though, was that when I came back here to the Olchen Valley, the landscape would be telling me the kind of story that I wanted to write. What I mean by that is that when you stand here at the head of the valley, what strikes you is the horseshoe shape, which makes it a perfect enclosure. There's just the one very small road that leads into the valley before losing confidence and heading out again. And then, of course, there are these incredibly steep escarpments, which are very beautiful, with a sense of protection, but which are also strangely threatening, almost with an atmosphere of menace. The seeds of the story that I wanted to tell about an occupied Britain were actually sown in a piece of history that never had to happen. And that was the very real plans that Britain had for a secret resistance army in the event of occupation. This organisation, called the Auxiliary Units, was to consist of cells of 6 or 7 men throughout the country, to the tune of about 3,500. In the event of an invasion, these men were to go to ground in underground bunkers, some of which were actually built around here, and they were to wait there for between 2 to 3 weeks until the German army had passed them. Then they were to literally come out from the ground and begin their acts of sabotage. Probably for not that long. Most of them were told that their average life expectancy would be only 2 weeks. What really fascinated me was the incredible level of secrecy that these men would have had to keep in small rural communities. Had they had to leave, they would have done so overnight. Their families would have known absolutely nothing about it. And that's why I chose to open my novel with 6 women waking up in the Olchen Valley just to find their husbands gone. I knew, however, that there was only so long that you can have that kind of an absence at the heart of a book. So I had to have something to come along to challenge, I guess, both the reader and me, and most importantly, the women in the book. And that's when I had the idea of bringing in a patrol of mostly quite young German soldiers to set up camp at the mouth of the valley. Well, if it was the geography of this valley that gave me the shape of my book, it was this old ruin up a blind that led me to my main character, Sarah Lewis. I can still remember so clearly the first day that I came here. It was a very, very different day to this beautiful summer's day. It was a dark day in the depth of winter. And when I got here, what really fascinated me was the isolated position of this house. This really is the last human outpost in the valley. After this, there are a few fields and then just wild mountain. Not much else other than perhaps a few wild ponies. And having got here, as is so often the case with ruins, I couldn't resist having a look inside. Well, at least the door isn't locked. Wow, it's been quite a while since I've been in here and I'd actually forgotten what estate it is. But it's still incredibly evocative. You just look at these old beams, completely shot with woodworm as well. And judging from the size of this fireplace, this was probably the main room. Oh, and you actually can see light at the top of the chimney as well, so no nesting blackbirds. And through here, I guess, goes into the kitchen and the parlour. Stairs. Might not risk the stairs, but that carpet on the stairs, that was the kind of thing that when I first came in here really starts to give you a taste of all of the past lives that have inhabited this house. Ruth Parry is the treasurer of the Longtown Historical Society and was an invaluable source of historical detail for me when I was researching the novel. I tell you what, one question that I wanted to ask you, because I suppose also I wanted to thank you because you and your mother were kind of crucial for me early on when I was finding my way kind of into the book, especially into the historical detail of the book. And so I used to sort of turn up here all sorts of times, didn't I? Not always with that much notice. And we would talk and you would show me documents and things. I was just wondering, were you surprised by how I used any of those facts that you gave me? Or because obviously...
One, yes.
Oh dear, which was that?
The one on the school. It was the school the school leaving certificate.
That's right.
And the German officer looked at it in Sarah's house because she kept it on her side, didn't she?
That's right.
And he said it reminded him of what was it? How did you put it? The German.
I think, yeah. He was bringing his own personal history to it, which is a history of the Hitler Youth and this rhetoric. So he had an instinctive kind of defensive attitude towards what I actually thought. I mean, this was the school certificate that Sarah was given when she left school at 14, which was it was entirely based upon the school certificate that you showed me. And I thought it's actually full of great advice. And I wanted that advice to kind of reflect itself throughout the book. So, you know, towards the end of the book, some of the advice is and is not being followed. But no, I'm glad that you landed upon that, because that for me was an example where a piece of research actually affects the story very, very strongly. And, you know, before you'd shown me that obviously wasn't going to be in the story, so there were whole sort of pathways within the story that actually didn't exist. So it's an interesting dialogue between the factual research and the fictional writing. When I was standing in the Olchen again, I was really struck again that it has a very specific atmosphere, doesn't it? How would you describe the atmosphere of that valley?
My mother spoke of a time when they had ice on the trees and the branches were breaking off around you as you drove. So imagine being up there and living in that. You
really would feel as if you were at the end of everything, wouldn't you?
Yeah. I wouldn't like to be up there. It's too isolated.
It's a lonely place, isn't it, really? It might sound strange, but from the very first page, I knew exactly how this novel was going to end. I'm not going to tell you the ending now, of course, but what I will say is that the more time you spend in a valley like this, both mentally and physically, the more you find yourself looking up at the horizons of the valley walls. And of course, being a traveller and a walker, the thing about horizons is that you always want to see what's on the other side of them.